We are going to continue talking a little bit more about career advancement and talk with Kimberley. Kimberley Bueno-Schonig is going to teach us about strategies for landing a job in tech. And she has lots of years of experience and expertise, and I hope that everyone can enjoy this. Thank you
Hi,
so
Lisa.
much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for that introduction. I think we're ready to go with this presentation, so I can go ahead and dive in if that's okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for sticking through the end. I know there's been several tracks I've been popping in, and all of it has been amazing. Amber was amazing. Huma, who just went, was amazing. I also peeped into Lexus's NFT session that she just had. So hopefully you're all enjoying. And of course, since we had a whole conversation about steering your career advancement, today we're going to give you some tactical and actionable items so that way you can land a job in tech. If you are someone who is interested in tech and maybe you just don't know how to do that, well, today make sure you have your pencils or your notebooks ready or your digital notebooks ready, because we're going to talk about it. So here is the itinerary for what I'm going to quickly go over in the next hopefully 20 minutes. I'm just going to kind of introduce myself, go over some data. We're going to talk about some foundational assets and then dive into job search strategies, interview prep, and then some resources you can access. So a little bit about me. I have over 6 years of coaching experience and also fintech experience. I've worked really closely with a lot of financial services and technical tech industry. One thing I've also been doing for a lot of corporations are curating programs specific to learning and development. So a lot of employee development, manager, and leadership development. So I've worked really closely with a lot of companies on making sure that you are able to grow in the company. I've facilitated over 175 virtual and in-person programs related to career professional development. And the strategies I'm sharing today have been tested and tried not only by myself, because of course, just like Huma mentioned, continuous learning is a big thing, but also by my clients. So these are tried and tested, and I stand by them 100%. So what is your goal for this session? Your goal is to walk away with actionable steps to make your transition to tech and make sure you execute them. Let's go over some data on women in tech, because obviously Google has created this amazing day for us to talk about how to break into tech, empowering women who are in tech, sharing resources and tips to do that. But let's kind of go over the data. In 2019, there was about 30.8% of women who are actually represented the overall workforce in the tech industry. In 2022, women represent about 32.9% in the overall workforce in the tech industry. And this data is actually taken by Deloitte. And I wanted to share this image to kind of showcase the growth that we've seen so far on female representation. Now, basically, in short, over the past few years, we've seen a 6.9% growth of women representation. That's amazing. That's a pretty great jump, right? We've seen an 11.7% growth of women representation in technical roles in the industry. So if you're watching this and you're interested in breaking into a technical role, we're seeing a huge growth in that. So I encourage you to keep going for that. We've seen a 19.5% growth of women representation in leadership roles in the tech industry. So of course, we want to see more women in leadership in the tech industry, and we're seeing that happen. I wanted to just share this graphic also provided by Deloitte, so please feel free to just take a look at it. It breaks down the growth from 2019 and the predicted growth for 2020. So I want to just end with something that Deloitte has mentioned. They predict that the large global technology firms on average will reach nearly 33% overall female representation in their workforces in 2022, up slightly more than 2 percentage points from 2019. So if you're thinking about it, I want you to know that you can definitely break into tech. How you do it is by highlighting your transferable skills and by being proactive in your job search. So let's first talk about foundational assets, because those are probably one of the most important things in your job search strategy. So I'm going to quickly just talk about what are foundational assets. You might not have heard of this before. I just like to call it. Ultimately, I like to break it down into 4 things: your resume, your cover letter, portfolio, and LinkedIn. So what does this mean? I'm going to talk about your resume in a little bit in the next couple slides, but I do want to talk about and highlight cover letters, because oftentimes I get questions from tons of clients asking, should I write a cover letter? Is it required? My short answer is unless it's required, you don't necessarily have to submit a cover letter, but if you write a really strong cover letter, it can play to your benefit, right? It's supposed to highlight or showcase the additional experience that you want to share with a hiring manager or recruiter. The biggest thing I want to just caveat here is that you want to make sure your writing is pristine and solid. So just make sure that if you are thinking about writing a cover letter, just have several people take a look at it, make sure there's no grammatical errors, and make sure you're utilizing that asset as a way to really highlight why you are the correct or the best candidate for that role. Portfolio, right? A portfolio can mean a different thing for different people, depending upon what type of role you're trying to go into. If you're someone who's into UX design or design in general, and you're trying to break into tech, a portfolio can look like some of the examples of designs that you've created. A portfolio can also be a website that kind of showcases your coding experience or additional projects that you might have worked on. And lastly, LinkedIn. I know in another track, someone was talking about how LinkedIn has helped them a lot, and I stand by this 100%. LinkedIn is a growing platform, and I highly recommend that if you do not have a LinkedIn profile, to make sure you go make one right now. It's completely free, and it will help you not only network, but also just show a different side of who you are and up your personal brand, because that is important in today's job search strategy. So I'm going to kind of dive in now into your resume. So what should you include in your resume? I'm just going to kind of quickly break it down. Obviously, you want to have your first name and last name and your personal information, such as your LinkedIn URL and your contact information. Some of the sections you want to include in your resume is a summary for those that are a little bit more experienced, which should just be 1 to 2, 3 sentences highlighting and giving a very high level overview. Obviously, you want to include your experiences, any license and education, and lastly, your skills. So these are just the basic sections of what a resume should have. And in the at the end of this slide, we will also share a resource sheet with you that will give you a template that you can definitely use. So common mistakes that I've seen, not only with resumes, but I know as a former recruiter, I've also seen, are grammatical errors. So make sure you're having people proofread your resume. Make sure you're just reading over all of your bullet points, because we want to make sure all those grammatical errors are taken off. Another mistake is applying with a generic resume. Oftentimes I see a lot of people just have one generic resume that doesn't necessarily dive into the specific details of what your skills and experience are, and they use that generic resume to apply to a bunch of different jobs. And that right now, with the type of job market we're in, is not going to necessarily help move the needle in trying to land that job in tech, right? Another common mistake is multi-page resumes. I've seen resumes with 10 pages. And if you're someone who has less than 5 years experience, your resume should really only be 1 page. Formatting issues. There's a quote out there and a statistic that says it takes about 6 seconds for a recruiter to take a look at your resume and decide whether or not you're going to move forward. As someone who's also looked at resumes and worked with hiring managers and recruiters on this, I will say that maybe it's about 6 seconds. It does make it a lot easier when your format is pristine and easy to read. If it's difficult to read and you don't have great formatting on your resume, that could be a sign of lack of attention to detail, a lack of really understanding how to make things a lot easier for the recruiter and hiring manager to read your resume. It can cause confusion on understanding where your experience is on your resume. So just make sure that you're using the correct format. small font, difficult to read font. Sometimes I see resumes with tiny font, or really big font, which is not necessarily going to help you in your favor. So biggest resume tip that I want to share with you is curate each resume for each job. So what does this mean? Ultimately, I have some actionable steps for you on curating your resume. Is create a resume that only you will see, that lists out all the jobs, all the experiences that you've had throughout your lifetime, right? I always recommend this to people because it just helps you get all your thoughts, all of the items that you have worked on, all the projects that you've worked on a single doc. And this is totally okay if it's a multi-page, right? This is not what you're going to be sending out. But the reason why I like to have this as a strategy or an exercise for people is because it just kind of puts everything into perspective, right? And not only that, is that once you start making more robust bullet points under each experience, you can start using that as a foundational resume to pull from when you're trying to create a curated resume for a specific job. Now, when you have this resume, you want to make sure that you're reading the job description thoroughly, right? Like I mentioned before, you do not want to send a generic resume. You want to read the job description and really understand what skills and experiences do you have that's transferable to a job in tech or for this particular job, right? You want to make sure that you're being thoughtful and really intentional with the bullet points that you're trying to place in your resume. Now, when you are reviewing your resume, you want to make sure that everything that is being highlighted is either providing metrics, data, and you're asking yourself, is this bullet point relevant to the job description? Is this bullet point highlighting a transferable skill that I know will be useful for this job? Awesome. So hopefully that was super helpful. Now let's dive into job search strategies. And at any point in time, if you have any questions about it, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I am more than happy to answer any questions. All right, so for job search strategies, I like to kind of give an overview because we only have a little limited amount of time today, but I've kind of broken it down into these few things. We're going to talk about search, curate, apply, research, and track. So you're probably thinking, Kimberly, what does that mean? Well, let's first talk about a strategy tip that I have to share with you. When it comes to job search strategy, and of course I want to acknowledge the great resignation that we've had, right? It's still going on. It's still very difficult for companies to hire talent because either people are starting businesses, maybe people are just deciding that they know that they either deserve to get paid more or want better benefits or just want a different type of work environment, i.e. virtual or hybrid work environments. So when it comes to the great resignation, right, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's easier to land a job. I still hope and encourage you to try to be as proactive in your job search as much as you can, right? It is important and imperative for you to try to be as proactive as you can, and I'll kind of dive a little bit deeper in what that means because that will help you stand out as a candidate. Now, here are some actionable steps for your job search strategy. As I mentioned before, I broke it down in a few points. Search. What does search mean for me, at least? Search. What I mean by it is be very specific in the positions you are applying for. And what I mean by this is if you're someone who's unsure about what type of position you're interested in, make sure you really ask yourself, am I interested in an admin position? Am I interested in a product manager position? Am I interested in HR? When you are able to kind of solidify what your goal is in your career, you're able to kind of make sure that your foundational assets are ready to go. When you're having interviews, you can clearly speak to what your goals are, both short-term and long-term. It will ultimately play to your benefit. Now, curate. Curate your resume and your cover letter for each position you are applying to. And I know this might take some time, but it's an incredibly important step. Apply. Sometimes, honestly, what I've seen with specific job postings, when you can apply to a job as soon as it's posting, the faster you apply to it, the more likely a recruiter and a hiring manager are going to be able to see your application, right? If a job posting has been up for about a week, you can expect that 100 other people have already applied to that job. So when you're trying to prepare your foundational assets, you're actually doing yourself a favor of reducing the time of prep work to apply to a specific job. So just make sure that you're trying to apply as soon as possible when you see a role that you think you're a really good fit for. Research. Look for the hiring manager or recruiter on LinkedIn and be as proactive as possible. Now, again, if you don't have a LinkedIn, make sure you go ahead and create one. But there are tons of ways where you can do some research on LinkedIn to find the hiring manager. Oftentimes, we'll see hiring managers or recruiters post a specific job that they are recruiting for or sourcing for. And that's a really great opportunity for you to connect with a hiring manager or recruiter and introduce yourself and give kind of like a very high-level overview about why you are the best candidate for the role. Lastly, track. Now, I personally am a believer in this. If you don't feel like this is something up your alley, you don't need to do it. But I personally believe that you should create a tracker for yourself that lists out each job that you are applying to, along with columns that list out the potential hiring manager and recruiters for that job. And the reason why I like to just encourage this is that not only are you able to see how many jobs you've applied to, but you're also able to see the status when you applied to it, when you've applied or reached out to the hiring manager or recruiter, and kind of just get a sense of what's working or what's not, right? There's always opportunities for you to improve and make progress, right? Because of course, if you're someone who maybe hasn't been job searching for a while, that might be something you're kind of have to work up to again, right? And so with that being said, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to continue going. We're going to jump into interview prep, right? Because obviously, say for example, you're already on it. You've already had your foundational assets already done, pristine. You did great on your job search strategy and you've already landed a few interviews, right? You're probably thinking, okay, what's next? Well, of course, you're going to go through some series of interviews. And I will say tech companies vary in terms of how long the interview process can be. I've seen very lengthy interview processes. And I think what Huma mentioned is that a lot of companies are actually investing in making sure they have the right candidate for the role, right? So make sure that before you actually interview for the job, you're researching the people that are interviewing you. And make sure also to read recent articles about the company to show that you've done your research, right? It's one thing to ask the same question that everyone else is asking, but it's another to go a step further than that and know a little bit about the interviewers, right? And I'll know a little bit more about the company's direction. Maybe you know what their future business goals are, or maybe you know a little bit about the team. The more you show that you've done research, the better it's going to play to your favor. All right, so here are some actionable steps for you to prep for your interview. Build a pitch, right? If you don't know what that is, it's ultimately how I like to kind of just describe how to answer tell me about yourself. I do a lot of mock interviews with a lot of people just to help them prepare and feel kind of what it means to get interviewed by someone when they ask you, tell me about yourself. So knowing how to pitch yourself, sell yourself, know how to answer that question is going to really help you. The first few seconds when you talk to a hiring manager or recruiter can really help navigate and lead how that conversation is going to go. Understand the STAR method. It's a great way to know how to answer behavioral questions. And in the resource sheet, I have linked some videos and some descriptions on what the STAR method is. Record yourself and watch it back. Something that I really do think that will help you in your interview process is speaking confidently, right? It can be nerve-wracking when you're very excited for this job, but you haven't interviewed for a while. So one of the best things you can do is practice not only with family and friends, but to record yourself and see where you can slow down, see where you can pause, see where you can kind of tighten up or say things more succinctly. And one of my favorite tips is to hop on 15 minutes before your actual interview to double check your tech. To be completely honest, I actually, before I hopped on and presented, I hopped on an hour, 30 minutes before I was actually supposed to present because I was that paranoid about my technical issues. And this might not seem like a big deal, but say, for example, your tech problems all of a sudden come up during an interview, right? That can just be a lot of time potentially that you would have lost if you just had prepped 15 minutes beforehand or even 30 minutes beforehand. And lastly, practice, practice, practice. I can't stress that enough. The more you practice speaking to other people, the better you will be at it. Awesome. And I know we're almost out of time, so I wanted to allocate some time for questions, but I just wanted to quickly talk about some resources for your transition to tech because I know that with these actionable steps, you can definitely land that job. Whether you're in a technical role or a non-tech role, I guarantee you that with your proactiveness and being able to really strengthen your skill set, you can definitely land and transition to tech. Now, some of the things I'm a really huge advocate for is finding opportunities to upskill yourself, right? Or to level up your experience. And one thing that Google offers are certificates through Coursera. I have personally done the project management certificate, and I think that they've done a really great job. You can find it on Grow with Google. Some things you get actually when you go through the certificate or you go through the course and receive your certificate is you get access to a bunch of career resources. You get access to everyone else who are also taking that course. And it could be an opportunity for you to get your foot in the door, right? There's also great LinkedIn learning courses and also the resource sheet that I'll be sharing with you the end of this deck, but also I think everyone, I think Google will be sharing it with you after. Awesome. I believe that is it. I hope this is enough time for Q&A. I just wanted to see if we had enough time for Q&A.
We do have time, and we'd love to have some questions, but if it's okay, I'd like to start with one.
Oh yeah, of course.
I was keeping an eye on the chat, and somebody brought up having that easy click button for applications, such as Indeed and LinkedIn. Can you kind of give everybody the short of what your thoughts are on that and the advantages or disadvantages?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And my personal opinion is to not only apply through LinkedIn if it says an easy apply, but also apply through the website. It doesn't hurt to have your application go in twice. If anything, it's just another way for the recruiter or hiring manager to see your name in the ATS. So I personally think it's great to just do both just in case, just because the way that I've worked with the LinkedIn recruiting tool is that oftentimes we reference first the company website to see if any applications come through, and then we will check LinkedIn. So I personally recommend doing both.
Great advice. And I will say, with Indeed Easy Apply, the formatting is not very friendly. So if you can avoid the Indeed Easy Apply, I highly recommend avoiding it if possible. Do you agree, Kimberly?
Yes. Yeah, I actually am not familiar with Indeed's Easy Apply, so I personally, anything off of Indeed, I would just apply directly. With LinkedIn, it's a little bit nicer because they do actually have you upload your resume, but I still think that it's always good to just apply directly too.
I agree. Thank you so much. So someone asked, how do you stand out from the tech talent competition right now?
That's a great loaded question. And I personally think A, being proactive, B, finding opportunities to work on projects. It depends on what type of role you're interested in. I think for those that are interested in technical roles, specifically engineering roles, I think it's a great opportunity for you to kind of work on projects outside of your current role or outside of what you're currently doing to really showcase those engineering skills, right? Another thing you can do is take courses like on Grow with Google or through LinkedIn. But I think that's one of the biggest ways to stand out.
Thank you. That was a great question. Can you share, after this, I imagine, a few screenshots of a well-formatted resume so people can see?
Yeah, of course. In the resource sheet, I've also attached a resume template, but I will make sure to provide some screenshots as well.
Is there anything that you would say means well formatted to you?
Sure. I mean, the biggest thing that first comes to mind is sometimes I've seen people put their photo on their resume. That's definitely not a standard format. I think ideally, when I think of formatting, I think of consistency throughout the resume. So, when you're putting the job title and the dates across from it and the company underneath it and the dates of employment, are those consistent throughout the entire resume? Are the margins consistent? Are the bullet points consistent? Sometimes I see people put one bullet point, but then five on another experience. And just knowing that, that to me, that would come off as a formatting issue and then potentially also a content issue as well. So some of those are the top things that come to mind.
Great. Some companies have automated filters to strip through the styling. How do you stand out from the tech talent? Oh, I guess they're asking with the automated filters, how do you stand out if you can't really format your resume when you're applying?
Yeah, I think by automated filters to strip the styling, are they talking about a Google Doc maybe?
Let's see. I think that, so as I understand it, so some very large companies ultimately are just going to strip out some of the information and provide over almost like a bio instead of the actual resume
Ah,
document. I think
yeah.
that's what they're
So
doing.
I mean, I know with some of the companies that so for example, I helped with I've looked at and reviewed some of the resumes from at Two Sigma while I was there, and I could tell you right now that what will help a lot is if you're able to have a strong LinkedIn profile. One of the first things that a recruiter or hiring manager does is look at your LinkedIn profile, and also on top of that is just making sure that if you are someone who has a couple years of experience, having a strong summary at the top. I know that recruiting agencies do this a lot, is that they'll kind of have a small bio at the top of your resume when they send it over to the company. So that's another way you can stand out, just because it's giving a high level overview of, who you are. And lastly, I think that this is where the proactiveness needs to come into play. When you're reaching directly out to hiring managers or recruiters and starting that conversation, then there's already that conversation there that will allow for you to determine whether or not you're going to move forward or whether or not you're a good fit. So those are just some strategies that come to mind.
Thank you so much. Any other questions out there from the audience? What are your thoughts on being connected to LinkedIn to your parents? Is this seen as inappropriate?
That's a very interesting question. I would say it's probably not considered inappropriate. I don't think LinkedIn comes off as almost like Facebook, where it's very social. I think when you have a LinkedIn profile, it's actually not as easy to see your network, right? You kind of have to know who to look for, click on that specific page, and then go through it. So I think it's totally fine for you to connect with your parents. I don't think that's inappropriate at all.
Thanks, Kimberly. But I would know we don't want your parents to leave reviews for you.
Yeah, that's a good
Well,
one.
Kimberly, I think that we're we're going to wrap up the questions, but any last thoughts, anything you want to wrap with?
I think I just want to end with saying thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to support you in your journey into landing a job in tech.
Wonderful. And do you prefer people reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, that works. That's perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was really fun.
Thank you so much for having me.